Hi, I'm Matthis Chiroux of The Disobedient, and you are watching The Punk Patriot. Hi, my name is Matthis Chiroux. I'm a veteran of the Army. More importantly, I am a radical insurgent for peace here in the United States of America, struggling to overturn the systems of oppression that formerly ruled my life.
And so what sort of things are you doing to achieve that end?
Well, I've been working very hard to erode the active duty soldiers' willingness to carry out illegal orders. I've been working to inform them of just how heinous what they're involved in really is. I've been working to help them to understand that while there's a lot of rhetoric around supporting troops, most people don't like what's going on. And furthermore, many consider it a crime and find it beyond unconscionable to continue to excuse and pardon continued deployments downrange. Recently, I've been doing a lot of work at Fort Hood. It's the United States' largest military base anywhere in the world. It's a rapid deployment base, so there's constantly people deploying out of there. And I've been working with a group called Fort Hood Disobeys, or the Disobedient, to organize and execute radical, direct, and visible action in the military community of Fort Hood, both to wake soldiers up to the fact that there is a movement that carries these ideals, and as well invite them to join it.
So what sort of things are you doing?
Well, we've had a number of marches in and around Fort Hood. We work a lot directly engaging soldiers' commands in very challenging ways, in very visible ways, so that soldiers themselves can see us going after their commands, who are responsible for continuing to give them the orders that they continue carrying out unlawfully. Recently, we organized an actual physical blockade of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment's first wave of deployment to Iraq. They were sending soldiers in buses to the airfield. We stopped those buses out front of the base, holding up signs that said, "Please don't make the same mistake as we did." And in fact, weren't arrested. The police responded to us. They beat us out of the street. The buses passed, and even as the buses were driving by, you could see the soldiers inside and tell just how interested they were in what was going on. Many did seem to be very excited that there were other people out in the world who didn't want them to go to Iraq as badly as they didn't want to go to Iraq. We got some revolutionary fists of solidarity in the window. We've even had some response from people who were on those buses that looked us up afterward because they'd never seen anything like that before. Because at least in modern peace movement history, there hasn't been anything like that before. Our group recognizes that soldiers joining the military in and of itself is a radical act. You are volunteering to put your life on the line in very extreme conditions for a cause that you believe in. And we recognize that this radicalism can translate into movement activism very rapidly if there are individuals there to challenge soldiers to think outside the brass. And that's what we do. We challenge them to think outside the brass. And the more we do that, the more we find that soldiers aren't going to carry these occupations out without question any longer. The military is at a breaking point, and they need to be hearing from us right now.
So you mentioned on the bus, you said you had supporters on that bus. Why is it though that people, like, if they didn't want to go to Iraq, why aren't they actively resisting? Like, is there something in the culture?
Yes, it is very culturally ingrained that soldiers do not refuse orders, even if they think they're unlawful. I think soldiers fear the consequences of refusing to deploy. I think soldiers fear that they will be viewed as a coward, or that they're somehow simply trying to avoid danger by refusing to deploy, when clearly, more often than not, it's a very moral decision not to deploy, and it's a very courageous decision not to deploy. I think that so many, especially young men in this country, associate committing acts of violence with manhood. So I think even refusing to commit acts of violence to many calls into question their own manhood, because they've yet to realize what a man truly is, and a man truly is not a beast. And that is what our military is asking our young men and women to be.
So, for the average citizen, war is really depressing to think about. Isn't it easier just to not think about it?
It may be easier to not think about it. The problem with such a train of thought is that it discounts just how horribly people are suffering, and it takes away the responsibility of the individual to do something about it. Just because people in Texas, people in Illinois, people in New York can't see the people of Iraq and Afghanistan suffering, can't see the soldiers themselves suffering, doesn't mean that it's not real, and doesn't mean that they don't have a responsibility to do something about it. We like to believe that we live in a democracy, and if that is so, people, regular citizens in this country, are just as responsible for the crimes of our government as our military.
So, have you seen the movie Avatar?
I have.
What do you think of it?
I thought it was a pretty good movie. It really drove me crazy in so many ways to see an audience full of Americans practically weeping over seeing imaginary blue aliens oppressed by soldiers without really making the connection. I saw a lot of people look at the scenario presented in the movie Avatar and understand that is unjust. That is wrong. However, they failed to make the connection to the people of Iraq and Afghanistan. In a way, it almost made me feel like in my activism I need to stop going out and advocating for the rights of Iraqis and Afghans and Palestinians, and instead just start referring to them as imaginary blue aliens from another planet, and maybe people will show a little bit of empathy. But it's nuts to me. And the fact that that other movie, Hurt Locker or whatever, that was glorifying the whole military experience, won the Oscar is just, another reason why I can't consume mainstream American media.
I understand that you were waterboarded publicly.
Oh, wow. Yes, I was.
What was that like?
It was absolutely terrifying. I was waterboarded under simulated conditions. It was George Bush's last speech at the United Nations, and so me and some members of World Can't Wait decided what better way to honor that than by waterboarding a war resistor out front, which I am, a war resistor. I refused to deploy to Iraq when given orders a couple of years ago. Like I said, it was a controlled environment. I was not actually drowning. I had a protective shield over my face. Even that said, it was probably one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I did go outside the wire in Afghanistan.
What is outside the wire?
On combat patrols.
Yeah, so I understand that also, I saw a public statement that you gave when you were talking about why you were refusing to deploy, talking about how you had heard are you a military reporter, or were a military reporter?
I was a military strategic communicator, which translates to propaganda artist. I was taking the chicken shit that is U.S. empire and turning it into chicken salad for the masses. Probably one of the more despicable jobs you could do in the military, and really traumatizing. I sometimes have a hard time expressing to other soldiers just how traumatizing it can be to take something like your art and turn it into something that is used for evil. The military does a lot of work to break killing down to just this, to just that. It's a simple thing, and you don't even see people. You just see targets popping up, and you drop them, and targets popping up, and you drop them. And it comes down to this. The thing with something like writing is it's not just this. There's a whole lot of this that goes on. And so when it comes to me looking back and trying to not justify, but reason with what I did, I feel like it's a lot more difficult for me to reason with the art that I put into a war crime than had I just been guilty of this.
And you had mentioned that there were a lot of terrifying stories that you had to smooth over or whatever.
Oh, geez, yes.
Could you maybe describe some of those?
Okay. Well, I think probably the most damaging story I had to cover when I was in the military was of a Romanian staff sergeant who had gotten his legs blown off, or one leg and part of his hand blown off in a landmine incident in Afghanistan. He was being treated at Lahnstuhl, the military hospital there in Germany, and I went to do a story about him, not because the Army was interested in this young man's story or his sacrifice. I was given orders to go produce a story about how wonderful the U.S. military is for caring for Allied soldiers within our hospitals, and how this young man could have not nearly gotten the same treatment had he gone back to his home country, and about how we were really stepping up and providing something of worth to this young man beyond getting his legs blown off in another war. It was devastating. I met with this young man in a contained room, air sealed, because he was in isolation, because he had toxic bacteria in his blood that was leaping out into the air and was actually infecting military hospitals all over the world at the time. Not just this one guy, but this bacteria was everywhere. And he was in isolation, not but a few days after having his leg blown off. And so being a soldier going into that environment, not to talk about his sacrifice, but to talk about how good the U.S. military is, to talk about, to try and take his sacrifice to make us look good, destroyed me. And it was dishonest. And it goes against everything that journalism should be about. And furthermore, it was even more difficult walking out of that room and seeing the dozens of other American soldiers who had also had legs and things like that blown off. But I wasn't there to talk to them because they couldn't make us look good, the same way that Laurentu Serban could make us look good. And that killed me. And even after that, after I released the story and everybody in the military went, wow, what a great story. So glad we got to take care of this guy. 3 months later, I found out that they totally screwed up his operation to the point where he was back in the hospital. He maybe would have been better off going and getting treated in Romania because the U.S. Army medical system screwed him up so bad. That's just one example of many, many, many examples in which I was clearly there to do a job, to tell a story that was contrary to what was actually going on.
You essentially served as sort of like a Karl Rove sort of figure as far as like framing things and whatever.
Yes.
Do you think that now you could use those same skills for framing arguments and working in media and so forth to be a sort of Karl Rove for progressives, anti-war?
Yeah, I dig. I have to tell you, I try not to. Part of my experience with the military has created in me a fierce opposition to the use of propaganda, be it for the cause of peace or the cause of war. I see propaganda as a form of mind control, a form of mind control that I engaged in. And I think, honestly, one of the greatest respects you can give to somebody is giving them the right to disagree with you. At this point, I am fully dedicated to speaking my mind, to speaking it honestly, even if it doesn't look good for the movement, for me personally, whatever. I'm not trying to message the truth anymore. I'm trying to represent it. So no, I'm happy to leave my skills as a propaganda artist with the military and never pick them up again. I've even had people in the movements very eager to utilize me in these ways, and I've had to say no, because I think it's just as immoral if we do it.
Did our government lie to us?
Has our government ever told us the truth?
It's a good question.
Can you answer it?
No. For me, just as a citizen, it's really easy to be like, oh man, like that really sucks. Well, I guess I'll go back to my 9 to 5 and there's nothing I can do. What can people do?
People can put their bodies down on the line. People can lay their bodies upon the gears of the machine. People have to recognize opportunities to do this first. This action that we recently engaged in down at Fort Hood, where we physically blockaded the buses, demonstrated just how easy it is to put your body on the line when you are thinking in terms of challenging power. Every American has the ability to challenge power in any number of ways, and they can be doing it in each and every second. Even simply representing unpopular viewpoints challenges power. And even if it's as simple as sharing your opinions with people that the wars are crimes, does make a difference. We need people in the streets too. We need people out there. We need people involved in what we're doing with Fort Hood Disobeys. You know, we need people going to forthooddisobeys.blogspot.com and staying up with us as we continue to develop our site and continue to find ways to incorporate others into the organizing that we're doing. But there are limitless numbers of opportunities for civilians and just citizens to involve themselves in this struggle. It's just a matter of when.
If things don't change, what do you see the future being like for America, and how drunk will I have to be to not care?
I have a hard time with this one sometimes because I'm not into false hope. I see it as just the flip side of fear. They're both projections. Realistically, things might get a lot worse before they start to get better. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop struggling. In fact, it means I'm going to struggle harder. But it does mean that I recognize the stakes at play here, and the stakes are enormous. They have never been greater. We are looking, I fear, in the next 50 years at a potential global consolidation of power within the global ruling class. And what scares me even more is when that becomes a global consolidation of force, of weapons. That, to me, is my greatest fear in the next 50 years, is that the global ruling class will consolidate itself despite nation lines, and in fact consolidate their military power, at which point there will be no more balance. You know, it will literally be us against them. And if you are a global ruling class who will survive no matter what, what's the fear of dropping a nuke from time to time to put down some type of rebellion? Things can get extremely dangerous extremely quickly, and this is why I think it's imperative that we act immediately. You know, even just in the simple sense of there are people immediately dying and immediately killing. And there are families being immediately destroyed by these occupations, and we need to be immediately concerned with that. You know, I am into planning for the long term, but what we need is action now.
Do you plan on ever running for office?
Fuck no.
And why is that?
Because the system is broken. Getting the right people in power is not going to change a thing. I hope that the election of Barack Obama is proving this to the American people, that it doesn't matter who we put on top of this ship, it is still bound for destruction. And it is still going to do what it has done since the very beginning. And we can no longer pretend that America was once great, because what's going on right now is absolutely nothing new for us. And if I ran for office and I joined the system that is carrying out these crimes, whether or not I did so with honorable intentions or not, would not matter. I would be a part of it. I would become a war criminal. And I have no interest in doing that.
So do you feel that there is a way to move forward politically? Or do you think it's going to be only direct action that will change things? Or
well, I see direct action as possibly one of the most political acts somebody can take. In fact, I see voting as one of the least political acts that people can take. This is very political, what we're facing right now. What we need to understand is part of how this ruling class thrives is by consent. People consent to it. People consent to their politics and consent to their means for influencing politics. The American people need to break faith completely with the U.S. government for any type of real political climate that's actually going to change things to evolve. They are not going to change until they realize that if they don't, they will no longer sit in power.
Thank you very much.
No worries, Asher. Thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, very good.